Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest in the series of the AWMSG Open Days. This is, as you know, the third. So my name is Stephen Lister. I know most of you, I think. I'm a senior economist. I sit on the TDA partnership and also on the NMG, the New Medicines Group. So lots of experience of this wonderful team who are going to take you through the appraisal process number 2. What we're going to cover today is a brief welcome and then a brief update on communications and engagement. How do we best engage with the team here who are running appraisals? A recap of key appraisal points, a little section on a new process for appraising medicines for children, which I know will interest you, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. If you do get questions throughout that you want to put in the chat, feel free. I just thought, let's just keep the end in mind here. You know, the purpose of everything we're doing is to make transformational medicines available to patients in need across Wales. So when things get a bit complicated, if you're not quite sure, let's get clarity so we understand, because that is the end game here, and that gets me out of bed every day. But without further ado, let me pass over to Ruth, who's the Senior Liaison Manager within AWTTC, to take us through comms and engagement. Ruth.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think I've been wheeled out this morning to talk about the old days. So I'm going to ask for the first slide up, please. And I'm going to take you back to the start of the AWMSG journey and tell you a little bit more about how the relationship between AWMSG and the pharmaceutical industry has evolved over the last 19 years. So AWMSG met for the first time in Wrexham back in October 2002. And membership of AWMSG is drawn from each of the health boards, and that ensures that there's broad geographical representation. And each member brings different skills to the table in that they've all got different roles within the NHS or in academia. And there's an industry representative nominated by ABPI and one lay member. That has recently been changed because Welsh Government updated the constitution, so we now have 2 lay members on the group, which is more in line with other public committees. So back then, members were appointed by Welsh Government via the public appointments process, but nowadays only the chairman is appointed by the Health Minister, and appointments are made by the committee chairs through the steering committee with the approval of Welsh Government. So that's a significant change. A member's term of office is 4 years, and members can serve a maximum of 2 terms of office, which gives the maximum 8 years membership. So I can remember the very first meeting very clearly back in Wrexham. I was doing what I do now, supporting the chair, taking the minutes and overseeing proceedings. Rick Greville and Karen Samuels were there in the audience, I remember. So I've seen many members come and go, and I've had the pleasure of working with 6 different chairs. So there'll be a prize for the first person who can name all 6 chairs. Next slide, please. So before we could even think about holding a meeting, we had to develop an appraisal process. So we pulled together key partners in a room in a hotel in Mid Wales. So there were AWMSG members, pharmaceutical industry, medicines and therapeutics committees, chief pharmacists and clinical leads. So we also invited the Scottish Medicines Consortium with the aim of sharing experiences, pooling ideas and trying to come up with an appraisal process that was open, transparent and robust. So at that time, the SMC was newly established. So we thought by aligning the appraisal process in Wales with Scotland, we might encourage the industry to submit their medicines for appraisal at the same time, with largely the same information, in an effort to make things a little easier. So that being said, we still like to have AWMSG submission forms, and we have had occasions when there's been a copy and paste with SMC still in it. So we like to avoid that if at all possible. So this photograph shows Mr. Peter Harston. So he's the gentleman in the middle at the back, and he is a delightful gentleman, and many of you will also recognise Phil Routledge, who stands in there on my left. And it was Phil's idea to set up the AWMSG, and he persuades me to get involved. And behind Phil, there's a young Kerry Phillips, who I'm sure many of you will recognise because he's just recently stepped down as the AWMSG chair. So we pulled together, you know, pharmaceutical industry and the SMC right at the very beginning to have these conversations. I do miss the opportunity to have face-to-face meetings. When we started, we used to take AWMSG on the road, and we'd go across the whole of Wales. But that's all stopped, and we've had to embrace a new way of working. So the little photograph on the right-hand side shows me trying to adapt to home working 20 years later, struggling with IT and internet connections. Usually my 2 dogs are in the background, and my new best friend, the plant here, who seems to thrive listening to my voice for 7 hours, 8 hours a day. But anyways, there's been a lot of changes recently, but that said, I'm still as enthusiastic as I was back in 2002 when I embraced the challenge of AWMSG, and very keen to ensure that all inquiries, whether they come by telephone or landing in the inbox, that they're dealt with as efficiently as they were before the pandemic, when we were in the offices in Landoc. So every day my admin team work with a nominated pharmacist and a scientist, and they respond to the inquiries received during the working day. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this shows an AWMSG meeting, and unlike NICE and SMC, AWMSG meetings have always been held in public, and pharmaceutical companies are encouraged to send members of their team to observe a meeting, particularly if they're thinking of going through the process, because it's very important that the company delegates know what to expect at the meeting, because they've got a huge part to play in the appraisal. Meeting papers are available online approximately 10 days before the meeting, and any sensitive, commercially sensitive information is redacted from those papers online to maintain commercial confidentiality. But this photograph gives you an idea of the layout of a meeting room, and applicant company delegates are invited by the chair to join the meeting at the relevant part in the agenda when their medicines undergo an appraisal. AWMSG members face the industry delegates, but the public then have they're seated at the back. But as I say, we're hoping to move back to face-to-face meetings relatively soon, or have perhaps a hybrid, but it's a bit of a watch this space at the moment. Next slide, please. So what are the main differences? Well, when AWMSG was formed, the manufacturer of the medicine undergoing appraisal was not invited to attend AWMSG meetings, so they didn't participate in the discussion. It didn't take us long to realise that we needed to change this. So just over a year later, things changed, and company delegates are invited to attend and send 2 representatives, one to answer any questions on clinical effectiveness, and the other usually answers questions on the cost effectiveness. But any time during the appraisal, the chair will allow the company to respond to questions and input into discussions. In fact, industry delegates are given the opportunity to have the final word before the close of the appraisal. And the chair always seeks confirmation that all the important issues have been adequately discussed and asks for confirmation that the process has been fair and transparent. So when NICE and SMC moved to have public meetings themselves, they sent a small delegation to observe AWMSG meetings, and we're very proud that Wales led the way in appraising new medicines in public from the outset. So the vote, this was originally done by a show of hands in public, but we soon realised that that didn't work either, and we've moved then to the model that we use today, whereby all the discussion is held in public, but the actual vote is in private, but it's announced at the meeting if the meeting's been held in person. And now that we've gone to the virtual platform, we inform the applicant companies straight after the meeting. If the recommendation happens to be negative, the door remains open for the company to come back to AWMSG with new and improved information. And we do ask all companies for feedback, and that's very much appreciated, whether it's good or bad, because we can act upon that and adapt the process to make sure that it's as good as can be. So as well as the process, the remit of AWMSG has changed over time. Originally, AWMSG only appraised high-cost medicines, which was medicines costing £2,000 per patient per year. 5 years on, the remit changed, and it included new cancer and cardiovascular medicines. And then again, 5 years on, it broadened to include all medicines that weren't on the NICE work programme. So we do try very hard to avoid duplicating work with NICE. So there's quite a bit of liaison between AWTTC and our colleagues in NICE to establish whether or not we'll proceed with an appraisal. But if there's a window of opportunity, then we would always encourage you to take that. So at the very beginning, there were two subcommittees. There was the All Wales Prescribing Advisory Group, and membership on that committee was drawn from the service. Then there was the NHS Industry Forum, and that had membership from the service and industry. So AWPAG is still going, but the NHS Industry Forum ceased to exist in 2009. But the main difference is that AWPAG now has industry representation. But there's still two subgroups because, of course, in 2007, the New Medicines Group was formed, and that group assesses the clinical and cost effectiveness of a medicine and provides a preliminary recommendation to AWMSG. But it's AWMSG's role to advise Welsh Government, because AWMSG takes into account some things that are not considered by the New Medicines Group, such as wider societal issues, budget impact and equity. Next slide, please. So a more informal group was formed in 2003, and that was called the TDA Users Group, which was the forum for discussions between the pharmaceutical industry and AWTTC about the appraisal process and issues relating to the appraisal process. In 2011, there was a name change to the TDA Partnership Group, and just recently we've looked at the terms of reference of the group and changed the name again to the AWTTC Industry Forum, because we think that that more appropriately reflects the discussions that are now held in that forum, because it includes more about medicines optimization projects and less appraisal work. So our chair today, Steve, as he said, he's a member of that group, as is Sarah Jones and Rick Greville from ABPI. And EMIG is represented by Linda McNamara. Other members include Tony Williams, who is observing the meeting today, and he's head of patient access, PAMS, and Kath Haynes, who leads on medicines optimization and is head of the Welsh Analytical Prescribing Support Unit within AWTTC, and Mark Francis, who is the lead procurement pharmacist in Wales. Myself and other members of AWTTC staff attend. Conversations are very friendly, constructive, and there is a mutual respect, even when on occasions we do have to agree to disagree, but that's not very often. Next slide, please. So it's fair to say that as the process evolved, AWMSG went along on its journey, there was far more dialogue between the applicant companies and AWTTC, and that remains the case now. AWTTC acts as the facilitator and helps companies present their information in the best possible way with the aim of a positive outcome. Staff from AWTTC sometimes ask for additional information if they think it will improve the submission. And I would describe AWTTC's role very much as a supportive one. So in addition to the main committee and the two subgroups, pharmaceutical industry is represented at the steering committee by Rick Greville and his membership on the One Wales Medicines Access Group. So you can see there's a very good working relationship, and I hope it's evident in the film that we put together a couple of years ago, encouraging industry engagement. The main message of that film and from today is, in fact, is to encourage early dialogue and communication. We really do want to work together. Next slide, please. So to improve communication with key stakeholders, we developed a communication strategy, and Jess Rayner joined us just over 12 months ago as our very first senior communication and engagement officer. Jess has now moved into another role with Public Health Wales, but we've been very fortunate that Leah Mackenzie has been appointed by Cardiff and Vale to provide AWTTC with dedicated comms expertise. So I'm now going to hand over to Leah to say hello and introduce herself. If you have any questions for me, please do put them on the chat. Thank you all for attending today, and keep working with us to improve outcomes from medicines for the people of Wales. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Leah Mackenzie, and as Ruth says, I'm the new Senior Communications and Engagement Officer. So just a quick little bit of background about me. So I studied in my undergrad in Cardiff and then moved back home to Belfast to do my Masters in Communications and PR before going to work for the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland. After I worked at the Safeguarding Board, I then moved to lead on the PR activity of a private company before coming over here. So I've been here about a month now, and the first thing that I kind of got stuck into was the HTAI conference. And for me, that was a really good thing to start off with because it allowed me to gain an insight into certain aspects of the industry. So as well as, you know, it's important to improve relationship with stakeholders and increase engagement and awareness of the AWMSG and the AWTTC. My main focus is to implement the communications plan. So as Ruth mentioned, my colleague Jess Rayner created the communications and engagement strategy, and I've since then created a comms plan, and then I'm starting to implement that. So over the coming months, I'm going to be putting out some surveys, and the main audience for those will be patient and public, clinical and the pharmaceutical industry. And the main reason for putting those out is to kind of gauge the level of interest and awareness that people already have of the AWMSG and the AWTTC. So if you have any suggestions for or questions for the content of those surveys, that would be really interesting to get a look at, as that would help me then to focus my comms strategy and plan in order to kind of gain the best way possible to move forward with increasing the awareness and engagement. So that's everything I'm going to say, very quick, very brief, but I'm going to pass over to Steph now.
Morning everyone, and thank you Ruth and Leah for giving a good overview and a bit of an insight into some of the work that's going on at AWTTC. So I was just going to pick up quickly and give you a quick overview of what where we've been this year and what we've presented to you to help hopefully stimulate a few questions, and even if anyone's got any points to note or ideas for Leah, that would be great to hear those in the chat box. So if I can move on to my first slide. This is something I've already shared, but for those of you who haven't managed to make a meeting, or I just wanted to quickly highlight that what you've heard so far, so that you can share this with colleagues, and also it was a chance for me to remind people that this is all available on the website, and we really would love you to push it out to your colleagues, more junior staff, new members of staff, to really give them a feel for the work that's going on at AWTTC to support AWMSG and also to support market access in Wales. We've spoken about horizon scanning, and I know it's a common theme, but again, the main message there was to engage early, and also I think we've highlighted previously that we use UK PharmaScan as our main source, and we really do encourage you to look at engaging with that and again push the message out to colleagues and other pharma, smaller pharma companies that maybe aren't engaged in using PharmaScan. You heard from Wendy, Casey and Tanya regarding commercial arrangements in our first session, and we hope that that provided you with an insight into what the commercial arrangement team do at AWTTC. And again, I think a message there was that even if a medicine's going through NICE, we need to know as early as possible whether there's likely to be a commercial arrangement, so that there's no delay in providing that medicines for patients in Wales. Rosie Spears has spoken about the statements of advice and the work we've done looking at non-engagement, and we hope to push that on for the second half of this year. We've really focused on reviewing why companies might not be able to engage, and look at ways in which we can improve this. So if I can move on to the next slide. In the last session in June, I provided a bit more detail about the appraisal process per se. So that by that I mean from receipt of your Form B, full submission, or Form C, a limited submission, right through to ministerial ratification. And I hope that gave those who aren't so familiar a flavour of the process, and you can see the timelines that we've flagged on the bottom as the best possible case, providing there's no delays in amongst. You can also see on the slide where the company are likely to be involved, and where you get the opportunity to comment on the Secretariat report that we prepare, as well as attend an AWMSG. The new additions at the end are the green diamonds, and they're just to help lead to the next session of this session, which is for you to hear about the revised paediatric process. The revised process for appraising paediatric license extensions. So without further ado, I'm conscious of the time, slightly shorter session. I'm going to pass over to the team to give you an update on what work's been going on regarding the appraising medicines for paediatric license extensions. Thank you for your attention, and please put questions in the question chat so we can look at these at the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph, and good morning, everyone. I'm Claire Ganderton. I'm one of the senior pharmacists at AWTTC, and I've been leading on the review of the process for appraising paediatric licence extensions. I want to introduce my colleagues Kelly Wood, senior scientist, Susan Silvetto, senior pharmacist, and Alice Varnob, a medical writer, the other members of the team who've been developing the new process with me. And it's fair to say that it's very much been a team effort, and I'm very grateful to Sue, Alice and Kelly for all their hard work on this. So yes, you can see the whole team there. So next slide, please. I thought it'd be helpful to explain a little bit about what led us to review the existing process before we go into the details of the new process itself. So since 2010, applicant companies have been encouraged to make a limited submission to AWMSG when certain criteria are met. These criteria include what is termed a minor licence extension, such as extension of the product licence to include the treatment of children and adolescents, so those under the age of 18 years. The limited appraisal process takes about the same time as a full appraisal, which is approximately 6 months. Now, the process has, and it does work very well, but there are a number of things that sort of happened all around about the same time, which sort of led us to think that it might be a timely to sort of review the process. So we had some feedback from AWMSG members suggesting that there may be merit in considering some potential changes, and I have some data on the next slide which will help to illustrate that. We were also aware that NHS England had introduced the Commissioning Medicines for Children in Specialised Services policy in 2017, and that policy allows children and adolescents routine access to medicines which are approved for use in adults by NICE or as part of an NHS England clinical commissioning policy, as long as certain conditions and criteria are met. We're grateful to Malcolm Quayle, who's the pharmacy lead for specialised commissioning in NHS England, for taking the time to speak to us and explain the NHS England policy in more detail when we were starting to think about revising our own process here in Wales. And also around that time we were beginning to look at this, then we were aware that the Scottish Medicines Consortium were reviewing their process for appraising paediatric licence extensions, and they decided that they would actually no longer request an abbreviated submission for paediatric licence extensions. And finally, as I mentioned, we looked at our own data as well relating to paediatric licence extensions, which I've got on the next slide. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, for the period we were looking at, which was at the very beginning of the project, towards the end of 2019, we looked at the 5-year period between 2014 and 2019, and you can see the majority of limited submissions were for paediatric licence extensions, and all of these received a positive recommendation from AWMSG. But during the same period, we also identified 90 medicines which had received a paediatric licence extension, but for which we didn't receive a submission from the company. And then obviously we had to issue a statement of advice. So all of this sort of together supported the idea that it was worth reviewing the process and that we could hopefully bring about some changes that made the process both quicker and more likely to engage companies so that we can improve access to medicines for children and adolescents in Wales. Next slide, please. Thank you. So next was sort of the sort of developing the idea and the consultation process. So there were a number of options open to us. Do we sort of do something similar to NHS England? Do we do the same as SMC, or do we do something slightly different which might be more suited to the processes we have in Wales? So we came up with a number of different options, and which we put forward during the first few months of 2020 to the TDA partnership group and then to AWMSG. And it was really important for us to seek input from the TDA partnership group at that time. So from that, we then had an agreed option to take forward, which was a simplified version of the limited appraisal process. So I suppose it falls into do something else category, but you'll see from the process itself, we have taken elements from sort of what happens in NHS England. So we developed that, the team developed that and took that back to the TDA partnership group in October 2020 and then to AWMSG in December 2020 when it was endorsed. And I just also wanted to mention that we also sought feedback on the proposed new process from the AWMSG Patient and Public Interest Group as part of the Equality and Health Impact Assessment. So process was endorsed in December 2020, and the first medicine was appraised and recommended under the new process in March 2021. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Kelly, who's going to take you through a short quiz on the new process. So test who's done their homework and who's still awake. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Claire. So my part of the session will be taking you through a quiz, and then the second part of the session I will be running through the questions and answers using a presentation format. So if you do have a second device, you can join the quiz. Join us at slido.com, #080-72021. Or for those that may be more tech savvy, you can join us using the QR code. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to set that up. If you haven't got a second device, just please bear with us. We've only got 7 questions to go through. I think the highest number of delegates we've had joining these quiz sessions is around 32, so hopefully we can beat that score today. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Okay, so can we move to question 1, please? So question 1, are all medicines with a licensed extension for paediatric use eligible to be appraised using the paediatric license extension process? Please select yes or no. Okay. So I can see on the counter we got 14 that have logged in. 15. So, okay, can we move to the next question, please? So medicines need to meet certain criteria to be eligible for appraisal using the paediatric license extension process. How many criteria are there? Is it 3, 4, or 5? Okay. And next question, please. Which organisations must have recommended the medicine for use in adults for the indication covered in the submission, and can you select all that apply? Okay, next question, please. So you only need to submit a Form A for the paediatric license extension process. Please select false or true. Okay, that's great. Next question, please. If a submission meets AWMSG's criteria for appraisal as a license extension for paediatric use, which group will appraise the medicine? Is it the Always Medicine Strategy Group, the New Medicines Group, or both? Okay, next question, please. The appraisal process for license extensions for paediatric use includes a preliminary appraisal recommendation, also known as the PAR, by the New Medicines Group. Is this true or false? Okay, and next question, please. The final question, is the company expected to attend the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group meeting? Yes or no? Okay, that's great. So that's the end of the quiz. If we could move back to the slides, please. Next slide, please. So going back to question 1, are all medicines with a license extension for paediatric use eligible to be appraised using the paediatric license extension process? So the answer is no. I think there's around 27% of you that had that correct. So no, not all medicines with a paediatric license extension will be eligible because there are specific criteria that need to be met. And this leads on to the next question. Next slide, please. So medicines need to meet certain criteria to be eligible for appraisal using the paediatric license extension process. How many criteria are there? So there are 3 criteria that need to be met to be eligible. And the criteria include the license extension must be for use for medicine in patients aged under 18 years. The medicine has been accepted for use in adults aged 18 years and older by AWMSG or NICE, and that advice or guidance must still apply. And thirdly, the license extension must match the adult indication that was accepted for use by AWMSG or NICE in every respect except for the target age group of patients. And there may be a situation whereby a medicine receives a paediatric license extension and has been accepted for use in adults by AWMSG or NICE, but there may be a slight variation in the targeted paediatric population, and therefore this would not meet the criteria to be appraised using this process. Next slide, please. Question 3. Which organisations must have recommended the medicine for use in adults for the indication covered in the submission? So I think there was 93% that said the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group. Again, there are 2 organisations, as we mentioned in the last slide, and that's either AWMSG or NICE. Next slide, please. So you only need to submit a Form A for the paediatric license extension process. So this is true. When the team went to look to review the process, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a complicated, it wasn't a long-winded process. And by submitting only one Form A, it is anticipated that it will encourage pharmaceutical companies to engage with the AWMSG appraisal process, resulting in an increased number of submissions for paediatric license extensions and thereby improving access to licensed medicines for the paediatric population of Wales. Now, as you can see from that slide, there are different processes. It's a very simple slide, but you can see for the medicines that meet the criteria for appraisal as a full submission, we do encourage companies to submit a Form B as well as a Form A. And for medicines that meet the criteria for appraisal as a limited submission, we do ask the companies to submit a Form C on top of a Form A. But if medicines meet criteria for appraisal as a license extension for paediatric use, then AWTTC writes an internal assessment form, And this very much includes the clinical effectiveness evidence for the medicine, the budgetary impact, any societal aspects, and obviously any other issues considered would be included within this form. And also we put together a draft recommendation, and we forward this to the companies ahead of the meetings to check for factual inaccuracies. What I would say is that as there is only now just one form A for the paediatric license extension process, that we do encourage you to fill the Form A completely using the Form A guidance notes, which can be found on the AWMSG website. I won't spend too much time on the assessment and draft recommendation. Claire will go over these again further on in the presentation. So next slide, please. So if a submission meets AWMSG's criteria for appraisal as a license extension for paediatric use, which group will appraise the medicine? So I think there was, how many? 65% selected AWMSG and NMG. So for this, it's AWMSG. And this process, the medicine is not appraised by the New Medicines Group, but is appraised by the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group. Next slide, please. So the appraisal process for licence extensions for paediatric use includes a preliminary appraisal recommendation by the New Medicines Group. So this is false, and this answer leads on from the last slide. So there isn't a New Medicines Group meeting for this process, and therefore a preliminary appraisal recommendation is not issued by NMG. However, AWTTC writes an internal draft recommendation, which is emailed to the company ahead of the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group meeting. And we do ask the company to highlight any concerns with regards to the draft recommendation, including any factual inaccuracy. And we also give the company 5 working days to review the draft recommendation. And as you can see on that slide, there is a draft recommendation there, so you can actually see the format. Next slide, please. So this is on to the final question. Is the company expected to attend the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group meeting? So the answer is no. So we're not anticipating much discussion at AWMSG for this process, and we wouldn't expect you to attend. However, you are very much welcome to join the meeting. And now, since AWMSG meetings are conducted virtually, then obviously they are more accessible. So hopefully I may see you at the next AWMSG meeting. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'll now hand you back to Claire. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Kelly. Could I have the next slide, please? So yes, Kelly's nicely gone through the key changes to the process using the sort of the quiz. I was just going to talk about some of the differences in a little more detail, but I think Kelly's already done some of that for me, so thank you, Kelly. So you can see from this slide that in comparison to the limited appraisal process, if the criteria for the paediatric licence extension process are met, we only require the Form A, and we can potentially get from receipt of Form A to AWMSG in 8 weeks, compared to 18 weeks if we were to go to the limited appraisal route. So primarily because we've taken out the need for it to go to NMG, and we've replaced that with the assessment that AWTTC does. It does depend, that 8 weeks does depend on a couple of things. It depends when we get the Form A in sort of relation to the scheduling of the AWMSG meetings. And say, for example, there is no meeting in August in the summer and the summer break. But also it depends how how sort of complete the Form A is. So we may need to go back to the company just to sort of clarify some information, or just for a little bit of extra information that might be missing. So we would encourage you to refer to the Form A guidance notes, which we've also updated to help you complete Form A. So once we receive Form A, we've got 4 weeks then, during which time we review the submission, check that the criteria are met. But what we also do, so because 4 weeks sounds like a long time to sort of review if the criteria met, it shouldn't take that long. But what we're also doing is reviewing the clinical effectiveness and the budget impact information in that submission to check to see whether there's anything else that we need. So the aim being then, by sort of 4 weeks, then we will contact you and say, yes, it meets the, hopefully we'll say, yes, it meets the criteria. No, we don't need any further information, but we do need a little bit more information before we go any further. And hopefully it's not anything that's going to take you a huge amount of time to get back to us. So in reality, it might be 8 to 12 weeks, but certainly a lot quicker than the existing limited appraisal process route. So what happens then, once we're satisfied that the criteria are met and that no further additional information is required, the scope and schedule is agreed. And as soon as that's agreed, the details of the appraisal are added to the AWMSG website as we would for a limited appraisal. In terms of documentation, Kelly's already explained, so AWTTC carries out an assessment to confirm clinical effectiveness and budget impact, and that report is shared with AWMSG members, and that assessment report replaces the ASAR, which would normally go to NMG and then AWMSG. And as Kelly's also explained, we produce a draft recommendation, so there's no PAR, but there is a draft recommendation, which, again, as Kelly's explained, company has sight of ahead of AWMSG. That's also shared, that's actually published on the AWMSG website ahead of the meeting with the meeting papers. And what I should point out is if the draft recommendation, in the likely event the draft recommendation is negative for whatever reason, the applicant company may request to resubmit Form A with additional information with a view to going down a different appraisal route, so limited or full. And this was something that the TDA partnership were keen to include in the process, so that option is there should there be a negative recommendation prior to it getting to AWMSG. But once we've got through all of that, so then it gets to AWMSG, the process is the same. AWMSG will make a recommendation, and that the FAR, the final appraisal recommendation, is sent to Welsh Government for ratification. So with both processes, you get an AWMSG recommendation that's ratified, and then with that mandated funding. So whilst we've made some changes to the process to simplify it, there are still some similarities between the two processes, and it was important for us to retain some key elements of the existing process in order that it remains transparent and robust. And hopefully that's what we've achieved. Next slide, please. So we're still at the early stages of using the new process. To date, 2 medicines have been appraised by AWMSG using the new process, but I'm pleased to report that the limited feedback we have had has been positive. So the process is straightforward and transparent, which is what we were sort of aiming for. Next slide, please. Okay, so obviously we had an idea of what the anticipated benefits of the new process will be, and that's improving access to licensed medicines for children and adolescents, and partly because it's a quicker process. So advice will be we'll be able to publish advice earlier than we would have done if a medicine had gone through the limited appraisal process, but also hopefully because the new process will encourage companies to submit where previously they may not have done. And as I sort of mentioned before, the benefit of us going down this route and having an appraisal and AWMSG making a recommendation is that the funding is then mandated for the paediatric population the same way as it is for the adults, and so there's equitable access across Wales. But these are all anticipated benefits. So we do plan to review the process after 12 months to see if these benefits have been realised. So we'll be looking at the process timelines, level of engagement, and seeking feedback from AWMSG members, from AWTTC staff and industry. And of course, then we may decide to make further changes to the process as needed and as guided by the outcome of that review. Next slide, please. So further details of the process can be found on the AWMSG website at the link on the screen. We have updated a number of key documents in addition to the Form A and the Form A guidance notes, so the frequently asked questions, the process for industry engagement, and some of the timeline documents, decision process documents. So if you haven't already done so, then please take a look at the website. You'll see some text is in red in those updated documents, and that's just to make it easy to identify the changes. So any new text or any significant changes are highlighted in red, make it easier. But of course, and as always, we're always really very happy to receive queries at any time via email. I think Ruth sort of explained that as well. So, you know, if you've got any queries, if you looked on the website, you still can't answer it, then please drop us an email. That's either maybe before you make an application or during the process. We will guide you as best we can through that process. Next slide, please. So, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. That's all from me.
Now, I'm conscious that we have run out of time. Guys, thank you for your engagement. You know, it's so important to engage throughout to make great medicines available to patients in Wales. If you're stuck at any point, if you don't quite know what to do get in touch with the team who are ready and waiting to help. Do talk to your colleagues. There's plenty of people out there who've engaged over the last 10+ years, and it's simple, straightforward, relatively rapid. I'd encourage you to get stuck in. Any questions, any thoughts after this, do come back to the team who will address whatever questions you've got. If there's nothing else, Steph, it remains for me to thank everybody who's taken part. Thank you for your engagement and look forward to next time.
Yeah, thank you. The next session will be on the meds optimization, so please spread the word and we look forward to seeing you there. My final comment is we'll include the commercial access email on the follow-up email that will come out to you after this meeting, just so that everyone's got that to hand.
Perfect. Steph, what's the date of the next session, please?
Thursday the 23rd of September.
Thursday, 23rd of September, everybody. Get it in your diary.
Be confirmed, but we'll try and get that out ASAP through the usual channel.